everybody. This is Science Bridge webinar series, and my guest today is Sherazaan Ismail. She's medical scientist, and currently she's pursuing her PhD in medical virology at the University of Cape Town. Her research interest this far has been studying HIV pathogenesis and host immunity. And most recently, she's been exploring avenues that can facilitate the cure. She's also an avid reader, writer, runner, and swimmer. Hello, Sherazaan.
Hi, Martina. Thanks for having me today.
No, it's my absolute pleasure, especially that you are a medical virologist. Therefore, you can answer a lot of questions that's been bugging people recently with the current pandemics with COVID that has been going around.
Yes.
So can you start with what is COVID itself?
Okay. So COVID stands for coronavirus disease, and it's a disease that results from infection by a virus called severe acute respiratory syndrome coronavirus 2. So we abbreviate that to SARS-CoV-2. And when you become infected with this virus, you can have asymptomatic or symptomatic infection. And in the case of symptomatic infection, that group of symptoms is called COVID. The disease that presents is called COVID. And these can range anywhere, I'm sure you've heard by now, these can range anywhere from mild to severe symptoms that could potentially end in death.
And where does this virus comes from? Is there any consensus? Where does it originate from, aside from China?
So it's very difficult to establish exactly where a virus came from, because you have to study the first patient, the first people who were infected by those viruses, and then basically the animals that are in their surroundings. So COVID or SARS-CoV-2 is what we call a zoonotic virus. What that means is the virus was transmitted from animals to humans. So we have many examples of zoonotic viruses, including influenza and Ebola. And basically what scientists did was they isolated early variants of these viruses and sequenced them. And they looked at coronaviruses from animals in nearby populations. And basically what they saw is that SARS-CoV-2 is genetically similar to a bat coronavirus that has already been studied. And also parts of SARS-CoV-2 were similar to a pangolin coronavirus. So a pangolin is an endangered animal and is highly trafficked as well. And so scientists seem to think that that the pangolin is this intermediary host. So basically these two coronavirus sorts recombined and then was able to infect the human.
Yes, so infections, they come from animals, as you said, but is there any specific way of the contact with the animal that has to be done for us to be infected with their viruses?
So usually it's through very close contact with animals and live animals. And so in this case, one of the speculations was that it was people who were in contact with animals at live meat markets. Sometimes these zoonotic transfers happen in farms and in little villages or little towns that are close to wildlife. So zoonotic infections can happen anywhere around the world where there's like a really close interaction between the environment and humans, so wildlife and humans. And in a lot of these cases, it seems to be that viruses are transmitted from bats. So either from bats directly or from bats through an intermediary host. So, yeah.
And how does it happen that the bat doesn't die from the virus itself?
Well, because these viruses are adapted to living in bats, they don't cause disease in the bats. So it's basically like the bats have an asymptomatic infection, and then the virus gets passed along. Sometimes the intermediary host will have some kind of symptoms, but a lot of the time not either. So you don't really know that this is happening until a person becomes ill.
Okay, and from my knowledge thus far, the COVID itself is the RNA virus. So how does it differ from other viruses?
So basically, RNA just describes the genetic material that's present in the virus. So if you consider any virus, it's like a little shell of protein, and on the inside is the genetic material, which allows them to replicate. And if you remember anything from high school biology, if you took high school biology, then we have two different kinds of nucleic acids or genetic material. It's RNA or ribonucleic acid, and DNA or deoxyribonucleic acid. And basically, it's the RNA that encodes for this, all the proteins for this virus. It allows you to, it allows the virus to replicate in a host.
So how can you actually design a vaccine against the virus?
So basically, we make use of knowing the sequence of this RNA. And in the case of the mRNA vaccine, so I'll start with those. In the case of the mRNA-based vaccines, we basically just take the sequence of the spike protein and introduce that into cells. And because your own body also produces RNA to make your own proteins, when that RNA gets into your cells will make spike proteins. And then your immune system will be able to recognize these spike proteins and identify it as non-self or as a foreign entity, and will mount an immune response against that.
So you're saying that you're gonna inject people with the virus?
No, it's not with the whole virus. So it's just a portion of the RNA. There's no other components other than it's what we call a lipid nanoparticle. It's basically like a bubble of fat that coats the RNA so that it protects it on the way into your cells. So the piece of RNA only encodes for one of the proteins of the virus, and it's not infectious.
So basically with that one protein itself, the virus can't be formed de novo from that information. It needs all the information to be created.
So it needs information of all its genes to be able to make more of itself and assemble more of itself. And that's how the cycles of infection continue. But because there's only the RNA for this one protein present, only that one protein will be produced. And basically, I didn't explain this, but the spike protein is one of the proteins on the outside of SARS-CoV-2 virion. So that's the first thing that your immune system will see if a virus enters your body. And so it's easily recognizable, and it's the first thing that your immune system will encounter. So basically, what the vaccination does is it teaches your body how to recognize, oh, this is a component of SARS-CoV-2. It's there on the outside of the virus, and we now need to mount an immune response to that.
And what other components are there in vaccination? Because you said it's in the lipid, so in lipid bubbles, so it's kind of like a fat that it's being surrounding the genetic material. What else is there?
So in the mRNA vaccines, okay, let's start off more general with general standard vaccination combinations. So standard vaccinations contain the antigen or the part of the virus that you want your body to recognize. So in this case, in the case of SARS-CoV-2, it's the spike protein or S protein that we call the antigen. And then sometimes in some vaccines, there's something called an adjuvant. It basically kickstarts your immune system and helps you to build a stronger immune response to invading pathogens. And then a lot of vaccines also contain stabilizers, preservatives, and acidity regulators just to help with the transport and storage of the vaccine so that it doesn't go bad before we are able to use it.
And so there is no microchip.
No, no microchip in this vaccine.
Not in this one.
No, not in anyone.
Okay, so let's focus more on the differences between Moderna, Pfizer, and AstraZeneca vaccinations. What are the major differences?
Okay, so the vaccines are actually really similar. They're both mRNA vaccines, and like I mentioned earlier, they encode for the spike protein or the S protein.
So that's for Moderna and Pfizer.
Yes, yes, for Moderna and Pfizer. And basically, in terms of dosages, both of them require two doses of the vaccine, so you'll have to go in twice to get your shot, to get your shots. And both vaccines have an efficacy of around 95%. So what that means is you have a 95% reduced risk of acquiring SARS-CoV-2 if you've been vaccinated. And so that means that you have 95% less chance of becoming infected. Your body will clear the virus before it sets up shop in your body.
So you can think about it like a raincoat. If you go out to the rain and you put on the raincoat, you basically 95% of your body will be covered and your shoes might get wet.
Yes, your shoes might get wet. Yes, perfect analogy. So basically, the vaccines, at least a little bit more definitively in terms of the Moderna vaccine, it's been shown that the vaccine reduces the risk of you getting severe COVID as well. Less definitively answered in the Pfizer trials, but we'll obviously be getting more information on that as we vaccinate more people. So what this means is when you are vaccinated and you do end up becoming infected with SARS-CoV-2, then your risk of developing severe COVID is reduced. So that means that you're likely to have asymptomatic infection or just have mild symptoms. Okay. And that's obviously, if you consider the long-term effects that have been observed when you become infected with COVID-19. So if you actually become sick, they are very bad long-term side effects in some cases.
Yes, I heard about the permanent even lung damage.
Yes, lung damage, yes.
So what are the side effects of the vaccination? And I'm sure that our viewers are interested in more severe side effects that has been reported thus far.
Okay, so just to mention, the Pfizer vaccine has been approved for use in people over the age of 16, while the Moderna vaccine has only been approved for people over the age of 18, but both of them are being tested in other age groups. And so the side effects that have been reported so far is basically are some swelling and pain at the vaccination site, fever and headaches. And if you think about what your body needs to do to mount an immune response, needs inflammation. And so 4 reactions that your body has in response to inflammation is fever, pain, redness, and swelling. So anytime your immune system becomes active, you might experience some of those symptoms. And so this is a good thing. It means that when we're vaccinating and you happen to get a slight headache or pain at the vaccination site, that means your immune system is working to start producing a response against the virus.
Have there any reports about the severe side effects or allergic reaction?
Yes, there have been some reports of allergic reactions, but so far in the United States, the numbers have been limited to the tens, so fewer than 100 adverse reactions. And these have occurred in people who have a history of allergic reaction to vaccine ingredients, so either some of the preservatives or the stabilizers, not the actual I suppose, antigen itself. But it has been shown that these people had a history of allergic reactions. And so what will happen in that case is, if you have had a history of allergic reactions to vaccines or vaccine components, um, any vaccine, you should speak to your healthcare professional, to your doctor, before you go for the vaccine, and have them advise you. Perhaps it's just a case of they'll vaccinate you and then observe you for a couple of hours after you've been vaccinated, because usually with allergic reactions, they happen quite quickly after the administration of whatever you're allergic to. So you'll notice it within the first couple of hours after the vaccine. And basically everyone who's had an allergic reaction in the USA, who's reported an allergic reaction to either of the vaccines, has been fine. So they basically treat the allergies, and then the people recover.
And when you get the vaccination and your immune response is quite boosted against COVID itself, COVID could lead to cytokine storm. Is that the same case with the vaccination? And can you explain to our viewers what is cytokine storm?
Okay, so basically, when I mentioned earlier about inflammation, so cytokines are mediators of inflammation. They're little signaling molecules that tell your body, oh, you need to mount an immune response. Come on, wake up. And basically give signals to cells to direct them to the place in the body where the infection is. And cytokines and chemokines, these are mediators of inflammation, as I mentioned. And so in natural infection with SARS-CoV-2, so that's if you haven't been vaccinated and you've been exposed to SARS-CoV-2, basically what happens is, because of the presence of a lot of virus, and this virus is replicating in your body and just making more and more of itself, your immune system becomes overstimulated. And so we do need a little bit of inflammation to help along the immune response, to say, okay, you've got a kickstart. But sometimes that goes overboard. And so when your body is overproducing certain cytokines, it causes what we call a cytokine storm. And so that's your immune system overreacting to an infection, So that makes people quite sick. It leads to the severe symptoms of COVID, basically, because you're producing an excess of cytokines. And so with the vaccine, we don't see this type of reaction. We just see what I would term regular amounts of cytokines, so just enough to get your immune system stimulated. And that's because the virus isn't replicating in your body. There's no virus in your body with the vaccine. So you are just producing one of the proteins of the vaccine, of the virus, and then that is what your body mounts an immune response against. So it's not replicating, it's not making more of itself. There won't be an overstimulation of the immune system in the case of vaccination.
And after vaccination, if you would encounter the virus, are there chances of developing cytokine storm?
So if you remember, I mentioned earlier about the fact that in the Moderna trial, they showed that people who had been vaccinated who became infected with SARS-CoV-2, they had a lower risk of developing severe COVID. So that means that you are likely protected from the cytokine storm because of being vaccinated, because your body has a memory response to this virus already, and can basically get rid of the infection before the virus starts replicating to high enough levels to induce a cytokine storm. And so basically vaccination is good for you. It'll prevent any kind of big adverse effects to becoming infected, so long the severe symptoms.
So you are saying that the Moderna and Pfizer have a regime of 2 shots, which means the first one and the booster. So booster is exactly the same as the first
Yes.
shot.
Mhm.
Okay.
So
And
basically, sometimes to increase the response, you need uh, exposure again to the same antigen. So that's why we vaccinate twice, because this isn't something that's replicating. Your body gets rid of the vaccine. You vaccinate once, your body forms an immune response. And just to boost that immune response a little bit, we add a little bit more of the vaccine.